Surprisingly, industrialization in continental Europe was gradual due to many variations experienced between different countries, cultures, and economies. Initially, levels of industrialization were more or less the same. It wasn't until the late 1800s that a significant difference between Britain and other countries appeared. This gap only increased as the Industrial Revolution went into full swing. Starting around 1830, other countries took initiative and became bigger players in the newly industrialized market. For example, Belgium, being rich in iron and coal, began to adopt new technology and was able to grow substantially after being emancipated from the Netherlands in 1831. Additionally, France was also making good progress, but this growth was overshadowed by the massive growth in Germany and in the United States. Continent-wide increases like this in Europe stood in stark contrast to extreme deindustrialization in non-Western countries, such as China and India. These differences magnified inequalities not only within Europe, but also between Europe and the rest of the world. Britain enjoyed the benefit of having the least amount of physical and economic destruction from earlier wartime. However, the continent still struggled with remnants of the French Revolution, disrupted trade, runaway inflation, and social anxiety. The continent was also set back from inability to access and utilize British machinery. This disconnect caused the continent to lag behind Britain greatly. This was not the only issue faced by continental markets, however. First, Britain had the advantage of dominating the world competition in markets during Continental War. Second, British innovations had grown to be so complex that few or no engineers outside of England could understand it. Third, steam power became much more expensive and required large investments in the iron and coal industries. Continental business simply could not cover the expenses. Despite these setbacks, continental countries still had several advantages against Britain. First, most continental countries had a rich tradition of putting out enterprise, merchant capitalists, and skilled urban artisans. This gave them the ability to adapt and be versatile in the newly competitive market. Second, continental capitalists did not need to focus on making their own innovations because they could just borrow innovations, mechanics, engineers, and financial resources from England. Lastly, these governments were strong and could not fall to foreign influence. A government could easily tailor the economic policies of a state to fit their needs, and most continental governments eventually began to promote industry and catch up to England. The British, though, soon realizing the value of their products, attempted to keep them secret from other countries. It was illegal for a long time for artisans and skilled mechanics to leave Britain, and illegal until 1843 to export textiles, machinery, and other equipment. To get around this, people illegally left the country to spread British ideas to the continent. William Cockerill, for example, built a cotton spinning machine in French-occupied Belgium after escaping England. Cockerill's son started a factory, which became a hub for mechanics and new knowledge in continental Europe. Since many mechanics came illegally to work for Cockerill, he was informed of all or any new breakthroughs made in Britain. Another continental innovator was Fritz Harcourt. He saw machinery in England that astounded him. He thought that Germany had to match England's achievements, and quickly began to work. He set up a shop in a castle in the Ruhr Valley, and aiming to be the Watt of Germany, Harcourt followed his near-religious zeal to build steam engines. This process with wrought with expense, however. Despite becoming successful, the expenses Harcourt had to pay caused his operations to be cut off. Governments in continental countries often supported in-state business to promote growth. For example, when the war ended, a plethora of inexpensive and high-quality British goods flooded the French market, and in response, Napoleon put in place a form of tariff protection and put high tariffs on British goods to keep the French economy safe. Governments in France and Prussia also took the burden of paying or providing for infrastructure like railroads and bridges, which greatly hastened development. A journalist named Liss applauded efforts like this, as he believed that the government was vital to continental industrialization. He believed the government had a duty to do so, as manufacturing increased the well-being of all of the people, and to promote industry was to defend the nation. He avidly supported protective tariffs for infant businesses and disliked Britain's attempts to dominate the entire world. List's economic nationalism was designed to protect and develop the national economy and quickly became popular on the continent. Banks were also an important part in industrialization, though. Before 1830, banks were very secretive and avoided investments. In the 1830s, however, two Belgian banks got permission to present themselves as corporations enjoying limited liability. The banks were able to attract many shareholders and promote industrial development. Similar corporate banks cropped up all over Europe and worked together with various governments to establish railroads. The period between 1850 and 1873 was one of massive economic growth. Because of industrialization, the continent was connected by railroads to promote the spread of technology that had been earlier invented by Great Britain. In the early 1870s, Britain was still Europe's most industrial nation, but other nations were quickly closing the gap.